of threatening a government shutdown. GOP leaders should laugh these guys out of town, except one of the leaders is on board. The Nation has obtained audio they say is of Senator Mitch McConnell at a private meeting with GOP donors, saying if Republicans win the Senate, they'd use the same tactics that led to the shutdown.
We will be pushing back against this bureaucracy. I'm doing what's called placing drivers in the bill. No money will be spent to do this or to do that. We're going to go after them on health care, on financial services, on environmental protection agencies, across the board.
He's going to go after them? How's that for a plan for governing? McConnell is basically saying he'll only fund the government if President Obama does exactly what Republicans want, even if the American people don't. Joining me now are Ryan Grimm, Washington Bureau Chief for the Huffington Post, and the Washington Post, Jonathan Capehart. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Reverend.
Thank you, Reverend.
Ryan, the last government shutdown was a disaster. Why on earth would Republicans start talking about it again, even?
Right. I think what's most interesting about the talk this time around is who's doing it. You know, notice that we haven't heard from Ted Cruz. We haven't heard from the more far-right groups in Washington that led the effort the first time around. Instead, we're hearing from people like Mitch McConnell and Marco Rubio, kind of the quote-unquote responsible elites that like to say that they're upset about the extremists who are kind of taking over their party, and I think it's. Those two folks and a couple others are just kind of out to sea at the moment. I think Mitch McConnell's comments indicate that the race in Kentucky might be a little bit tighter than he wants it to be. He doesn't quite feel like he has shored up the conservative base, and so he wants to hint at a government shutdown to get that out. But notice that you haven't heard anything from Ted Cruz or the conservative groups, which is one reason I think that McConnell and Rubio kind of got out in front of their skis here.
You know, Jonathan, last year's government shutdown, it really hurt the GOP's image. One poll during the shutdown found 70% of Americans disagreed with their handling of budget negotiations. 70%. And today, House Democrats launched a new website, shutdownbrokenpromises.com is the name, reminding people that House Republicans promised to take the shutdown off the table last year. And we all remember how that worked out. Is this a good strategy for Democrats? I mean, to remind people what Republicans did on the shutdown?
Well, it's a good strategy for Democrats if Democratic primary voters hear the message and come out and vote in numbers that they've never come out before. I mean, I think Ryan is absolutely right. What Senator McConnell might be doing and what Republicans might be doing is trying to gin up their base to give them the feeling that if we take the Senate, if Republicans take the Senate, then they'll have the House and the Senate and they can bring President Obama to heel and do all sorts of things that the minority leader pointed out in the quote that the audio that you read, that we heard, but also possibly impeaching the president, right, which I've written about a lot. So what needs to happen here is in order to stop Mitch McConnell, Democrats have to come out and vote. But in order for McConnell to be successful, he's got to make sure that his base gets out there and votes to him win.
You know, talking about that alleged tape, the audio tape with Senator McConnell, it was in a private meeting, Ryan, with GOP donors. We also hear him talking about minimum wage. Listen to this. Raising the minimum wage is a, quote, gosh darn proposal. I mean, this is what he said. Doesn't that sound pretty gosh darn out of touch with regular Americans, right?
It does, and Joni Ernst, in another tape that was revealed today, said that she simply doesn't believe in the federal minimum wage, and she's a Senate candidate out in Iowa, and she's expressing what is becoming a more common view among Republicans, that there's something anti-American about a federal minimum wage, period. That that it should be left to workers and bosses to work it out, which is kind of the freedom of contract that you know about from the 19th century. It goes back that far. So in some ways, Mitch McConnell here is actually a moderate voice within the Republican Party when it comes to workers' rights here.
You know, Jonathan, besides the shutdown talk, we're also hearing Republicans back home answering questions about impeachment, which you've written a lot about. Listen to this.
I do believe that if the president had the impeachment proceedings brought against him in the House, that I think there's a very slim chance that the House would vote to impeach. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, and that doesn't mean that shouldn't be something that we consider. If we move against the will of the American people, there will be a violent reaction, and I do not think we will win the Senate. So let's focus on winning the Senate first.
He thinks that we should consider impeachment, but focus on the Senate first. So clearly this is, let's win the Senate, and then we can talk about impeachment. I mean, is this what the Republican agenda for the fall is, to deal with shutdown, impeachment? I mean, is this really going to be their agenda this fall?
Well, apparently, because impeachment talk, stopping the president, those are all things that gin up the Republican Party base. Keep something else in mind. Shutting down the government works just fine for Republican primary voters. There are no consequences for a lot of those people on Capitol Hill who would shut down the government. That's why we didn't hear a whole lot of hue and cry in the first few days from Republican districts, because, well, that's why they sent those people there to Washington in the first place in 2010. So I think, they're playing to the home base, and they're hoping that it will work. But another thing to keep in mind, Rev, since last summer, they have been talking about, folks in the base have been talking about impeaching the president, and the excuse has always been, we probably have the votes in the House, but we don't have the Senate, and so it would be a worthless effort. They stand a good chance of winning the Senate. They win the Senate, I guarantee you the president will be impeached. That's my prediction.
Let me go to you, Ryan, on this, something that Jonathan touched on. Don't they risk with this kind of talk of ginning up a more than usual midterm Democratic vote turnout? And wouldn't the Democrats be smart to do things like this webpage that I announced, to really start putting out there that the Republicans are talking about impeachment and government shutdown?
Yeah, we're in a strange place where politically, at least, nobody would benefit more from a government shutdown than Democrats, and if that's the political incentive, then they actually have every incentive to go forward and kind of tweak the Republicans. So the president is actually incentivized to come with the strongest immigration proposal that he can come up with, because it will gin up the Republicans, who then gin up the Democratic base. The Republicans are trying to gin up as much of their base as possible and get as close to the line without going over that line that alienates the rest of the American people. So, it's going to be an interesting 10 weeks as the parties kind of dance with their respective bases here.
Ryan Graham and Jonathan Capehart, thank you both for your time tonight.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
Coming up, new outrage over a man who was shot by police while holding a toy